The Ethereum station was less a station and more a rust-colored barnacle clinging to the edge of the known universe, orbiting the spectral chaos of the Veil Nebula. This region, a graveyard of ships from the Silent War, was also a treasure trove of forgotten, high-value technology. Life here was cheap, but the salvage was priceless. Inside the operations hub of the Ethereum, the atmosphere was a precise inverse of the stardust chaos outside. It was all cold steel, clean lines, and the low, steady hum of powerful reactors. And in the center of it all was Captain Kaelen Rexus. Kael, as he was reluctantly known, was a legend among the salvage fleet, a title he'd never asked for. At 35, his face was all sharp angles and perpetual shadow, framed by dark hair cropped severely short. He wore the standard-issue silver jumpsuit of the fleet, its fabric perfectly uncreased, its rank insignia subtly muted. He didn't just stand. He held a space, taut and unyielding, like a bulkhead designed to withstand a breach. He stood by the primary Acheron-class scout ship, the Stiletto, reviewing its diagnostic reports on his datapad. The Stiletto was his ship, his life, and his burden. It required 2 pilots and, crucially, 2 minds linked by the neural bridge, the technology that made the impossible maneuvers of deep space combat and salvage possible. He hated the link. He hated the involuntary intimacy, the ceaseless whisper of another consciousness in the back of his own, and the emotional debris it scattered across the landscape of his mind. Since the last co-pilot, a raw rookie who'd buckled under the psychic pressure, Kaelen had been petitioning for a solitary post. He was denied. The fleet required him for the Veil missions, and the Veil required 2 linked minds. The door slid. "Open!" And Kaelen didn't even look up. Sensing the shift in the room's energy, a sudden influx of kinetic, almost aggressive confidence. "Captain Rexus, Commander Thorne reporting for duty." Kaelen finished tapping a notation on his pad, waiting. A beat too long before raising his eyes. Lyra Thorne. He felt a muscle in his jaw tighten, not in anger, but in the familiar, uncomfortable rigidity of control. Lyra Thorne, the hotshot, the rival. She was 28, 7 years his junior, and radiated a kinetic energy that seemed to bend the light around her. She was lean, whipcord strong, with a tumble of auburn hair that fought against the constraints of her regulation ponytail. Her eyes, a striking, deep hazel, were fixed on him with a mixture of challenge and professional respect. They hadn't seen each other since the final exams at the Pilot Academy, years ago, where Lyra had narrowly beaten Kaelen's standing records, in every field except, significantly, long-term deep space command. They had been the 2 best, 2 opposing forces of talent. Kaelen, the methodical, ice-blooded tactician. Lyra, the intuitive, lightning-fast improviser. "Commander Thorne," Kaelen said, his voice flat, professional, and devoid of warmth. "I reviewed your transfer file. Your record is impeccable. Your reputation for initiative, however, precedes you." Lyra offered a small wry smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I prefer adaptive maneuverability, sir. The Academy's simulations don't account for the real chaos of the Veil. I excel in chaos." "Chaos is what gets pilots killed, Commander. Precision is what gets the salvage home. You'll find the Stiletto operates on precision." He gestured to the 2 pilot seats of the scout ship, sleek thrones carved from reinforced synth steel, separated by the low console that held the neural bridge interface. "You've run a bridge before, I assume?" "Yes, sir. Standard link level 2. Low latency, cognitive feedback. I was partnered with Lieutenant Valera on the Argus for 3 years." She paused, a flicker of something unreadable. Maybe pride, maybe defensiveness in her eyes. "I'm intimately familiar with the demands." "Intimately," Kaelen echoed, the word tasting like ash. He hated how accurate that description was. The neural bridge, developed during the Silent War, wasn't just a data feed. It merged the 2 primary sensory and motor cortices of the pilots. They shared reaction time, spatial awareness, and involuntarily, emotional resonance. In moments of extreme stress or adrenaline, the emotional barriers could disappear entirely. It was designed to make 1 pilot out of 2, but it often made 2 souls out of 1. The Stiletto uses a proprietary link, Commander. Level 3, near total synchronization. It handles the processing for the ghost drive artifacts we hunt. It's faster, more precise, and far more invasive. Kaelen handed her a sterile, metallic device that looked like a thin, flexible silver circlet. Get this on. It needs time to calibrate to your biorhythms before the initial sync. Lyra took the circlet. It felt cold and unnerving. She slipped it onto her head, where it nestled just above her temples, its micro-prongs barely visible against her skin. "Welcome to the Ethereum, Commander," Kaelen stated, devoid of actual welcome. "Your quarters are 3 decks down. You'll be assigned a full mission briefing at 0400. We link tonight. The calibration requires a minimum 8-hour passive synchronization before the first active jump." "Understood, Captain." Lyra hesitated, leaning slightly closer. "About the link, sir. I know the reputation of Level 3. Are there specific protocols you adhere to for maintaining separation?" Kaelen fixed her with a gaze so cold it could freeze plasma. "The protocol is simple, Commander. We are partners in the cockpit, professionals on the deck, and strangers everywhere else. The link is a tool, no more and no less than the stiletto's railgun. You control your mind, you control your emotions. Don't let your inner static bleed into the operational flow, and we'll survive." Lyra nodded, though a spark of frustration lit her eyes. "Crystal clear, Captain Rexus. Professional separation. I wouldn't have it any other way." Later that night, the neural integration lab was bathed in a dim, ambient blue light. Kaelen and Lyra sat in separate, heavily padded recliners, already wearing their circlets. Technicians hovered, making final checks. Kaelen closed his eyes, centering himself. He mentally constructed the walls he always used, thick, non-porous barriers of pure, objective logic. He compartmentalized the grief, the old memories, the perpetual weariness. Everything locked down. The man outside the cockpit was messy. The pilot inside was a machine. "Initializing link sequence," the technician's voice echoed in the quiet lab. Lyra took a deep breath. She had prepared for this, but the thought of Kaelen Rexus, her academy rival, the man whose ruthless efficiency she'd both envied and despised, being inside her head felt like a violation. A high-pitched, resonant tone pulsed through the room. Then the feeling hit. It wasn't a shock, or a pain, or even a sudden burst of noise. It was the absolute, total erasure of loneliness. It was like standing in a completely dark room your entire life, and suddenly a window is opened, not just letting in light, but revealing an entire, intricate, complex city. Lyra gasped, her eyes snapping open, only to see Kaelen's eyes already open and staring back at her, wide with the same jolt of invasive recognition. It wasn't a voice, it was a texture. Kaelen's mind was like polished obsidian, cold, hard, immensely deep, and utterly devoid of any extraneous movement. It was a fortress of control, and then she felt him feel her. Lyra's mind was a rushing river, all motion, curiosity, and bright, crackling energy, a chaotic, beautiful torrent of wanting to move, to challenge, to experience. She felt his immediate, crushing response, annoyance, an intense, visceral rejection of that noise. The feeling wasn't directed at her, not exactly, but at the disruption. It was Kaelen's baseline reaction to anything that threatened his self-imposed order. Lyra reflexively sent back an involuntary pulse of defiance, a sharp, prickly rejection of his judgment. The two emotions met in the mental space between them like two opposing magnetic fields slamming together. Kaelen closed his eyes again, his breathing shallow. Level 3 sync confirmed. Sensory feedback, green. Commander Thorne, maintain your discipline. I can feel your impatience. His voice was a forced whisper, meant only for her. And I can feel your disapproval, Captain. If we're sharing, let's at least be honest about it, she thought. Not vocally, but through the nascent channel. The mental transference felt less like speaking and more like projecting a mood. The link was a lie. It wasn't a low-latency data channel. It was an involuntary, emotional intimacy that bypassed all conscious defenses. Lyra felt the tight, almost painful coil of Kaelen's self-control, and underneath it, a vast, echoing chamber of grief, hidden, so deep it was almost invisible. "Don't look." Kaelen's mental command, sharp and cold, cut through the emotional haze. It was a pure impulse of self-preservation. "Stay out of my head." Lyra recoiled, pulling her consciousness back to the perimeter of her own mind. It was a strange, disorienting experience, like trying to stand still in a gravity well. "Link established and stable," the technician confirmed. "Passive sync complete. Welcome to the bridge, pilots." Kaelen stood up, moving with a controlled, predatory grace. He didn't look at Lyra again. "Briefing in 3 hours, Commander. Be ready." She watched him go, feeling the abrupt, jarring silence of his departure from her mind's immediate periphery. They were still linked, a faint metallic hum beneath. Her thoughts, but the immediate oppressive pressure was gone. Lyra touched the silver circlet on her head, her hand trembling slightly. It wasn't just a tool. It was a leash. 3 hours later, the stiletto was accelerating out of the Ethereum launch bay. The stiletto was fast, agile, and armed only with what it needed to survive long enough to grab and run. Their first mission was a high-priority, low-risk survey of a recently detected anomaly at the edge of the Veil, a standard shakedown run to test the new partnership. Lyra took the co-pilot's seat, her hands resting lightly on the twin side sticks that controlled sublight vectoring and shield modulation. Kaelen was in the primary pilot position, his own movements economical and precise as he brought the jump drive online. "We're entering the jump corridor, Commander," Kaelen said, his voice flat through the comms. His real voice, the one, in her mind, was an undercurrent of focused tension. "Hold the course line, Thorne. Don't anticipate the controls." Lyra bristled, projecting a flash of annoyance. "I know the procedure, Captain. I navigated the Argus through 3 contested zones. The stiletto is not the Argus." His mental reply was immediate and colder than the vacuum outside. "It's faster. The reaction differential is tighter." 3, 2, 1. "Initiating jump," Kaelen announced verbally. The world shattered into streaking blue and white light, the sensory input instantly overwhelming Lyra's conscious thought. The link, designed to synchronize their spatial processing during the transition, immediately kicked in. It wasn't just sight. It was the feeling of Kaelen's hands on his sticks, Kaelen's eyes tracking the distortion metrics, Kaelen's breath held in anticipation. Lyra's own hands felt alien, her muscles superfluous, because Kaelen's motor signals were bleeding into hers. She felt his mind's sheer focus, a terrifying, beautiful single-mindedness that could calculate 1,000,000 variables in a microsecond. But woven into that tapestry of control was a sharp, bitter thread of fear. Not the fear of a novice, but the calculated, absolute terror of a survivor who knows exactly what can go wrong. The jump ended, slamming them back into real space. The stiletto shimmered, its shields catching the light of a distant, dying star. "Jump complete," Kaelen confirmed. "We're at the anomaly marker. Scans, Commander." Lyra, still trying to sort the mental input from the link, nearly fumbled. The command. She could still taste the metallic tang of Kaelen's fear in her own mouth. "Was that your fear, Captain?" she projected, unable to stop herself. Kaelen's mental presence stiffened instantly, like a wall being rapidly constructed. "That was operational prudence, Thorne. Not fear. Process the data." Lyra forced her focus onto the sensor array. "Anomaly detected, not energy, but structure. It's a derelict. Ancient Silent War vintage, Class 5 decay, large mass signature. Captain, too large for a scout class." "Confirmed. Switching to passive scan. Let's get a visual." Kaelen rotated the stiletto, bringing them around the debris field. Lyra saw it on the main screen. The skeletal remains of a massive dreadnought, twisted and half-devoured by the Veil's caustic energy. It was a ghost ship, a reminder of the scale of the war that was now merely a salvage opportunity. Kaelen approached slowly, every micro-adjustment of the thrusters felt by Lyra as a corresponding, precise tightening in her own chest. "Hold that stabilization." "Right thruster adjustment on my mark," Kaelen commanded, the thought a razor edge in her mind. Lyra felt the impulse to overshoot the adjustment by a single degree. Her instinct was always to get closer, faster. She fought it, holding steady, Then, the sensor screen flashed red. Proximity alert. Captain, passive contact. Corporate Syndicate signature, Ethel-class heavy cruiser. They've detected us. They're powering weapons. Lyra's adrenaline spiked, and instantly, Kaelen's own adrenaline, ice-cold and focused, flooded her consciousness. Too fast, Thorne. Your reaction is messy, Kaelen snapped mentally. Evasive maneuver full reverse, Kaelen barked, his voice overriding the comms. Lyra's hands moved, but the link meant his motor command had already executed the move through her neural pathways. She was a passenger in her own body for a split second. The link is faster than your reflexes, Commander. Don't fight it. Trust it. A heavy plasma bolt ripped through the space where the stiletto had been a moment before. Lyra's tactical mind took over, bypassing Kaelen's critique. Shields at 80%. I see their firing solution. They're predicting our standard. Escape vector. Suggest a corkscrew counterdrift. Kaelen hesitated. His strategy was always a straight line, maximum acceleration. Corkscrewing was Lyra's signature, high-risk move from the Academy. In that half-second of hesitation, Lyra did it anyway. She executed the complex micro-thruster sequence. The stiletto tumbled, dodging the second volley by meters. The ship, groaning under the strain. Lyra! The mental shout was pure, unadulterated rage mixed with a terrifying undercurrent of relief. He hadn't just felt her move the ship. He had felt her impulsive decision, the spike of arrogant triumph and the rush of calculated risk. It worked, Captain, Lyra whispered into the comms, her voice shaking slightly with the shared tension. It was reckless, Kaelen bit back, his voice tight. We run on my command only, Commander. You do not improvise in a level 3 link. You... Hesitated, Lyra shot back mentally, her defiance a wall against his fury. Hesitation kills. My risk assessment was correct. Then, a sudden blinding flash. A memory, involuntary and raw, sliced across Lyra's mind from Kaelen's. It was not a combat maneuver, but a sound. The high, sustained wail of an emergency klaxon. She saw a brief, fragmented image. A co-pilot's helmet, cracked, and a hand reaching, not Kaelen's hand, but another's, clutching at a control stick, frozen. And the memory was steeped in a soul-shattering regret. It was gone as quickly as it came, slammed shut by Kaelen's fierce mental defenses. Kaelen's breathing hitched. The Ethel is disengaging. They've decided the derelict isn't worth the chase. Prepare for jump coordinates, Commander. Now. The mission was over. The damage was done. Lyra sat, stunned, her fingers numb on the controls. It wasn't the near-death experience that rattled her. It was the 2 seconds of pure, agonizing regret she'd just inhaled from Kaelen Rexus's deepest layers. She finally understood why he was so rigidly controlled. That regret was a scar, and she had just touched it. Back on the Ethereum, the tension was a physical entity in the air between them. Kaelen had filed a disciplinary note about Lyra's unauthorized maneuver, a professional censure that felt like a slap after the shared existential terror they'd just endured. I need to know your internal processes, Commander, Kaelen stated in his office, his voice low and controlled. Why did you choose the corkscrew over the standard Vector Alpha? Because Vector Alpha is standard, Captain, Lyra replied, leaning against the wall, her arms crossed. The Syndicate knows your patterns. They know Vector Alpha. I saw the Ethel's targeting lock, and it was predicting a linear evasion. I provided the chaotic variable. The chaotic variable is what led to my last co-pilot. He stopped himself, short, cutting the sentence off like a severed wire. Lyra raised an eyebrow, not verbally, but with a slight knowing projection of curiosity across the link. Your last co-pilot? The one in the memory? Kaelen shot her a look of such concentrated venom that she almost physically flinched. Don't, he warned, this time not a thought, but a low, guttural growl in the comms. That is outside the operational parameters. You will execute only the maneuvers I command. Is that understood? Understood, Captain. Command chain is absolute. Lyra pushed off the wall. But you need to understand something too. The link makes your tactical mind my mind. I felt your hesitation. When you hesitate, I have to act. We're a fusion, not a remote-controlled drone. Kaelen ignored her, looking down at his datapad. New mission. High priority. The anomaly we scanned was confirmed to be broadcasting a signal, an extremely faint, structured pulse. It's the signature of a ghost drive. Lyra's professional irritation vanished, replaced by sharp focus. A ghost drive? The fabled power source from the deep silent war era? I thought they were myth. They're real, and they're catastrophically unstable, Kaelen confirmed. They use a temporal phase shift field for near-instantaneous jumps, powered by a fragment of an ancient, sentient AI. The fleet wants it, the Syndicate wants it, and the Free League is already mobilizing. This is not a survey run, Commander. This is a snatch and grab under heavy fire. The stakes are maximum. Finally, a real mission, Lyra murmured, a spike of genuine, exhilarating anticipation flooding her senses. And then, she felt it again. The shock of Kaelen's agreement. Not the agreement of a superior officer, but the gut-level thrill of a veteran who feels the pull of a worthy challenge. He, too, was an adrenaline addict, masked by his rigid control. He looked up at her sharply, realizing she had felt his internal rush. A faint, almost imperceptible flush rose on his neck. Don't mistake the objective for pleasure, Commander, Kaelen snapped, mentally covering his tracks. The target derelict is massive. We need to find the core vault, rig the drive for minimal transport, and be gone before the Ethel returns with reinforcements. We will be linking Level 3 for the entirety of the mission, including the spacewalk. Absolute synchronization is mandatory. Lyra felt the gravity of the mission settle over her, overshadowing the emotional chaos. Level 3 spacewalk sync. That's almost total cognitive merger, sir. We'll be sharing motor control, sight, everything. It's the only way to navigate a zero-G core vault under duress, Kaelen confirmed. I need you to filter. Your impulse, you will need to filter your judgment of my methods. We act as one. One mind, Captain. Understood. Lyra straightened, meeting his gaze. For the first time, their eyes held a shared focus, a professional intensity that transcended their personal rivalry. The link hummed between them, an unwanted, inescapable promise of togetherness. The jump back to the derelict was a blur of synchronized sensation. This time, Lyra surrendered to the link. She didn't fight Kaelen's input, allowing his focus to overlay her own. The result was staggering. She saw the space around the stiletto not just with her eyes, but with the combined, processed understanding of two master pilots. Their reaction time plummeted to near zero. The ghost ship, the dreadnought, loomed, a skeletal, silent giant. They landed the stiletto in a shielded repair dock, a moment that required such delicate, simultaneous manipulation of thrusters, stabilizers, and inertial dampeners that Lyra felt their minds clutch together. Perfect execution, Commander Kaelen, conceded, the compliment a dry, momentary flicker of respect in her head. They donned their armored salvage suits. The neural link was now piped through the suit's systems, connecting their senses fully, their shared vision, hearing, and the incredibly complex shared motor control necessary for zero-G movement. Core Vault is located 300 meters through the wreckage, Kaelen announced, his voice tinny in her suit comms, but his presence in her mind was warm, sharp, and intensely focused. They moved as a single entity, their magnetic boots clicking against the damaged corridors of the derelict. Lyra raised her arm, and Kaelen's arm moved a millisecond before hers, correcting a slight overextension. He moved his head to scan a shadowy alcove, and Lyra saw it too from his precise angle, the information instantly processed by both brains. We are a beautiful machine, Rexus, Lyra projected, a tiny pulse of pride. Silence, Thorne. Acknowledge proximity alert. 3 contacts. Fast. Syndicate scouts, Kaelen ordered, the pulse of his concentration overriding her thought. They ducked into an alcove as the Syndicate scouts, clad in black armored suits, drifted past. They're sweeping the main corridor. We need to breach the secondary wall and take the maintenance access. Kaelen's thought was a blueprint, clear and actionable. Agreed. Laying breaching charges now. Synchronized detonation. 3, 2, 1. Lyra's hands moved the plasma torch, her fingers setting the charges, but Kaelen was guiding the process, correcting the charge orientation by a fraction of a degree. She felt his body tension, the familiar knot in his stomach that told her this was a moment of profound danger. The breach was silent in the vacuum, but the concussion hammered through the derelict. They slipped through the jagged, smoking hole. The vault chamber was vast, lit by the weak emergency lights of the derelict. In the center, floating in a magnetic containment field, was the ghost drive. A crystalline, throbbing structure, crackling with temporal energy. The AI core is active. That temporal signature is unstable. We have minimal time before the Syndicate arrives or the core tears itself apart, Kaelen commanded. I'll rig the field stabilizer. You prepare the transport crate. They separated slightly, two bodies moving, with the single purpose of one mind. Lyra felt Kaelen's intellectual awe at the ancient technology, the sheer genius of the engineering. And then, woven into that awe, she felt a strong, deep loneliness, the profound isolation of someone who has only ever relied on themselves. Kaelen, Lyra projected, the name involuntary. The link made honorifics feel stupid. Protocol Thorne, focus. His mental reply was a hammer blow, but the defense was weaker this time. She saw the crystal drive pulse, and she felt Kaelen's deep intellectual need to understand it, to control it. The emotion was so raw, so powerful that Lyra's own heart rate spiked in response. Then, the final, undeniable breach. As Kaelen reached for the field stabilizers, his gloved hand moving precisely, Lyra felt the involuntary physical memory of touch. It wasn't a shared memory. It was the instantaneous, reflexive projection of desire. She felt the warmth of his skin against an imaginary palm, the phantom pressure of his fingers, and the sudden, overwhelming lust that flashed, purely biological and utterly out of place. Kaelen froze, his hand hovering over the controls. He snapped, his head up, staring across the containment field at Lyra. He knew. He felt the sudden, unexpected spike of attraction, the rush of blood, the quickened breath. Not just hers, but his own reciprocal, involuntary physical response. No. This is forbidden, Kaelen mentally roared, his walls coming up with crushing force. The sudden mental rejection was so violent it felt like a psychic blow. Lyra stumbled, physically swaying in the zero-G environment. She hadn't consciously thought the desire. The link had merely made the hormonal, instinctual response transparent. Captain. Rexus, they're here! 3 more contacts at the breach point, we're out of time! Lyra yelled into the comms, forcing herself back to the surface reality. Kaelen pulled himself back, his face a mask of furious, mortified denial inside his helmet. Stabilizers rigged, transport crate charged. We retrieve and we fight our way. Out! Synchronized targeting solutions, Commander. Now! The emotion was still there. The raw, undeniable fact of mutual physical attraction, suppressed and professional, but humming beneath the surface of their desperate operational sync. They were 2 minds moving one body, and that body, in the face of death, wanted to live and to touch. The extraction was a synchronized nightmare. The Syndicate forces were waiting, heavily armed, and they were forced to fight through the claustrophobic confines of the derelict corridors. Kaelen and Lyra moved like a highly advanced dual processor. Drone. 1 mind, 2 suits, 4 limbs, 2 weapon systems. When Kaelen fired his railgun, Lyra's eyes automatically tracked the trajectory, and her stabilizer jets fired the microburst needed to compensate for the recoil. A maneuver impossible. For a single pilot, target, bulkhead junction 3 o'clock. Lyra, divert power to shield sector Gamma 7. Brace for impact, Kaelen's thoughts were pure machine-like commands. Acknowledged. Impacting now. Lyra felt the hit as a dull, shared thud. In the midst of the chaos, the emotional leakage intensified. The adrenaline was so thick that the link became a pure conduit for their most primitive fears and instincts. Lyra felt Kaelen's tactical brilliance, his ability to predict enemy movement 2 steps ahead, but she also felt a deep, profound terror of isolation, a fear so crushing it made her want to weep, not for herself, but for him. As they jettisoned the ghost drive relic and blasted off in the stiletto, Lyra finally had a moment of clarity. She didn't just feel Kaelen's immediate emotions. She was reading the layers of his self-imposed coldness. Once back in the Ethereum launch bay, the link was immediately severed. Lyra tore the circlet off her head, gasping for breath, the sudden, total silence of her own mind feeling vast and empty. Kaelen was already out of his suit, his face pale and drawn. He strode over to the tactical console, pulling up the mission. Data. Captain Rexus, Lyra said, her voice rough. We need to talk about the Level 3 protocols. That was too much. We can't function if we can't maintain separation. Kaelen didn't look at her. The mission succeeded, Commander. The ghost drive fragment is secured. That is the only thing that matters. We compartmentalize the emotional residue and we move on. I'm not talking about residue, Kaelen. I felt you, your terror, your isolation, and I felt your body react to mine in that vault. You can't tell me the link is just a tool when it's broadcasting your physical desires like a radio beacon. Lyra was shouting, the exhaustion and the psychic violation finally boiling over. Kaelen spun around, his eyes blazing. Don't use that name, Commander, and what you felt was my focus on the job. If you can't control your own juvenile impulses, that is a failure of your professional discipline, not the link's fault. It's not my fault. It's the fault of your walls. They are too thick. They're not keeping people out. They're trapping you in. I felt the regret, Kaelen. The screaming sound, the broken helmet. Who was he? Kaelen took a sharp step back, as if she had physically struck him. The air seemed to suck out of the room. He didn't deny the memory. He just stared at her with a look of pure, devastating defeat. His name was Jax. Kaelen finally choked out, his voice barely a whisper. He was my co-pilot 6 years ago, and my friend, on a run near the Veil. I hesitated. I was trying to find the perfect solution. He made an unauthorized move, a corkscrew, to save us from a volley. He was faster. But the maneuver was too aggressive for the jump stabilization protocols. His compensators failed. When the link severed, he was gone. I spent 2 months in recovery, knowing every fraction of a second of his final terror, because the link broadcast it all. Lyra felt the raw honesty of his confession like a physical weight. The hard truth was that her hotshot move had mirrored Jax's fatal mistake. You've been fighting every one of my moves because you see him, Lyra realized, the intensity of the link still echoing in her words. You don't trust me because you don't trust yourself to make a mistake that kills someone you care about again. Kaelen's face crumbled for a single, agonizing moment, revealing the deep fissure beneath the rock-solid exterior. The link is a lie, Lyra. It makes you feel things that aren't real. I don't care about you, and you don't care about me. We are two tools in a cockpit. The moment we blur that line, we become a liability. He ran a hand over his face, his composure quickly returning, but now it was a brittle, fragile shield. I'm taking a 48-hour mandatory rest period. You are confined to quarters. We will not communicate again until the next mission brief. He turned and walked away, his stride still perfect, but Lyra saw the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand. A ghost tremor she knew from the link was the true indicator of his profound distress. She was left alone, surrounded by sterile steel, and yet her mind was screaming with the noise of his silent agony. The forced intimacy had achieved its objective. The emotional barriers had collapsed, but it hadn't brought them closer. It had only ripped them apart. The 48-hour break was pure torture. Lyra, confined to her small, minimalist quarters, could still feel the faint, distant hum of Kaelen's mental presence through the station's ambient link field, a low-grade, constant awareness of his existence just down the hall. She meditated, she ran simulations, but all she saw was Jax's broken helmet, and all she felt was Kaelen's suffocating guilt. The call came abruptly, overriding the calm silence. Commander Thorne, report to the Stiletto immediately. Priority 1 scramble. The Syndicate is launching a raid on our salvage cache. Rexus is already on the bridge. Lyra was in her suit and on the Stiletto deck in minutes. Kaelen was strapped in, his face set like granite. He didn't speak. Initiating Level 3 link. Kaelen's voice was the only sound. The connection slammed into Lyra's mind. The familiar, cold obsidian of Kaelen's mental landscape was there, but it was sharper, laced with a fine, crackling static of pain. Kaelen, you're injured, Lyra projected instantly, her professional veneer dissolving. Minor shrapnel wound. To the shoulder during the prep. Insignificant. Focus, Commander. The Syndicate is 3 minutes out, Kaelen ordered, his discipline overriding the physical pain. 3 minutes, Lyra confirmed, her hands flying over the sensor panel. They're bringing the Ethel, the heavy cruiser, and 2 escorts. We can't fight them, Captain. We're not fighting them. We're securing the cache and leading them away from the station, Kaelen said. I'll fly a deep space evasive pattern through the outer Veil currents. They'll never follow. The plan was audacious and wildly dangerous. The Veil currents were gravity and temporal distortions that tore ships apart. Kaelen's unique mastery of high-G maneuvers was the only thing that made it conceivable. Kaelen powered the ship out of the bay. The moment they hit open space, they were targeted. Massive energy signature bearing down, Captain. Brace! Kaelen yanked the controls, the stiletto performing a near-vertical climb that slammed Lyra against her restraints. The move sent a spike of pure, white-hot agony through Kaelen's already compromised shoulder. Lyra felt the pain. It wasn't just a sensory echo. It was the raw nerve signal being processed by her brain. It was devastating. Lyra, my right arm is compromised. The movement tore the wound, Kaelen transmitted, his consciousness momentarily shattering into fragments of pain. The Syndicate is closing fast. We're entering the Veil's outer current. You need both arms, Kaelen. Lyra yelled into the comms. I can't. You take primary vector control. The command was brutal, desperate, and based on absolute trust, something Kaelen Rexus had never offered. I'll handle weapon systems and countermeasures, but the sticks are yours. Fly. Lyra felt a dizzying surge of panic, immediately followed by the grounding presence of Kaelen's trust. It was a terrifying, exhilarating weight. I need your tactical input, Kaelen. I don't know your Veil vectors. I'll give them to you. I'll map the currents onto your sensory feed. Think of my mind as the navigational computer. You are the processor and the executioner. Lyra took the sticks. The control was instantaneous. Kaelen's conscious mind began feeding her incredibly complex three-dimensional spatial data, the pressure points of the temporal distortion, the safe zones of the gravity shear, the exact throttle necessary to avoid both. Lyra flew on instinct, guided by Kaelen's pure thought. She saw the space through her eyes, but she knew the correct path with Kaelen's knowledge. They were a single perfect unit, Kaelen the brain, Lyra the hand. They're breaking off. The Ethel won't risk the deep current, Lyra cried, her voice raw with shared triumph. Not yet, Thorne. They're launching drones, 2 fast attack variants. They'll chase us out. Kaelen's hands, one usable, one crippled, flew over the countermeasure console. He guided the stiletto's railgun, a complicated series of firing solutions that required Lyra to compensate for the ship's momentum mid-flight. Lyra felt his utter reliance on her, the profound, terrifying vulnerability of handing over control. And for the first time, Kaelen didn't try to wall off his emotional state. He was a storm of focused energy, but Lyra could also sense the low, steady drumbeat of his admiration for her piloting. It was genuine, unforced, and completely undeniable. They blew one drone out of the sky. The second drone, a faster, newer model, locked onto their shields. Lyra! Dive! We need cover! Kaelen's mental command was a shout of pure desperation. Lyra drove the stiletto into a massive, collapsing nebula cloud. It tore their shields to shreds, but the cloud's temporal distortion also threw off the drone's lock. We lost them, Lyra whispered, her body trembling with exhaustion. Kaelen didn't reply on the comms. In the link, he was a silent explosion of relief, pain, and above all, gratitude. You saved us, Lyra. You saved the mission. The thought was a soft, warm thing, unpolished by his usual defenses, a bare emotional offering, and in that moment of shared bone-deep exhaustion, Lyra felt the emotional line cross. It wasn't just a professional respect or a biological urge. She felt a profound, caring connection to the fractured soul of the man in the seat next to her. She didn't want him to simply survive. She wanted his pain to end. The stiletto limped back to the Ethereum. Kaelen was immediately taken for surgery to remove the shrapnel. The Level 3 link was suspended until his recovery. The sudden silence was deafening. Lyra sat in the infirmary waiting room, her mind feeling too large, too loud, without Kaelen's constant, humming presence. The shared terror and the moment of mutual trust had forged an invisible, spiritual connection that the physical link had only enabled. When Kaelen was released 2 days later, he was pale but unbowed. His arm was in a sling, and his composure was firmly back in place. Lyra met him outside the infirmary. "You should be resting, Captain. You nearly tore your arm off." "Rest is a luxury, Commander. We have a ghost drive fragment to analyze, and the Syndicate is mobilizing a much larger force. We have maybe 48 hours before they hit the station." He held up a datapad. "The core fragment we recovered. It's a mapping module. It's broadcasting the location of the main ghost drive." "The whole thing? The source AI?" "The source. It's hidden in the absolute center of the Veil, a region called the Silence. No ship has ever navigated it, except maybe one flown by two minds who trust each other implicitly." He looked at her, his eyes cold, but Lyra saw the shadow of the man who had surrendered control to her in the cockpit. "I'm filing a medical exemption, Captain. I can't risk your shoulder. I'll pilot the mission with a replacement," Lyra stated, her protective instinct overriding her obedience. Kaelen didn't argue, he didn't shout. He did something far worse. He opened a small, controlled professional channel in the ambient link field, a Level 1 low-grade connection. "Need you, Lyra. The replacement will not have the synchronization required for the silence. You felt the Veil's currents through my mind. You know the language now. No one else does." Lyra felt the raw appeal, not a command, but a desperate professional need, seeping through the controlled channel. "You're manipulating me, Captain," Lyra whispered, stepping closer to him, ignoring the passing technicians. "I'm telling you the truth. The stiletto is built for 2 pilots, not 1 pilot and a passenger. I've never trusted a co-pilot before, not Jax, not any of them. But I trust your hands. I trust your speed." Kaelen's eyes were locked on hers, the admission a searing brand of honesty. "I'm sorry about Jax," Lyra projected back, a soft mental caress of sympathy. "But you can't make me into his memory. I'm not him. I'm reckless, but I'm fast enough to compensate for your pain." Kaelen flinched. He closed the Level 1 channel instantly. "Don't apologize for him. And don't project your fantasies onto my past, Commander," he said, his voice returning to its granite hardness. "We go together. Level 3. 48 hours. Get your gear ready." As Kaelen turned to walk toward the mission hub, Lyra reached out and caught his uninjured arm. Her touch was light, but it made him freeze. "When we link, I feel your need to be alone, Kaelen. I feel your conviction that emotion is a weakness. But I also feel a man who risked his life on the intuition of his former rival. That is not a tool talking. That is a human being." Kaelen slowly pulled his arm free, his eyes filled with a desperate, self-loathing passion. "I am a pilot, Lyra. That is all I am allowed to be. Don't confuse operational necessity with sentiment. The moment this mission is over, the link is severed, and we are strangers again. You will remember that when we are in the cockpit." He left her standing there, the metallic taste of his professional denial filling her mouth, even without the link. Lyra knew he was trying to save himself, not the mission. He was terrified of the connection, because the connection had finally made him feel something other than guilt. The mission to the Silence was suicide. The Veil Nebula was a swirling mass of temporal anomalies and gravitational shears, a silent, beautiful killer. Kaelen and Lyra sat in the cockpit, the stiletto humming around them. Kaelen's right arm was braced, but his left hand rested on the primary control stick. Ready. Level 3, max synchronization. "I want to feel every particle of the silence through the ship's hull," Kaelen ordered. The link engaged. This time there were no initial mental fireworks. Lyra's mind settled against Kaelen's like a hand fitting into a perfectly molded glove. The boundaries were porous, almost non-existent. Kaelen began to pilot the ship through the outer layers of the silence, his movements impossibly smooth. Lyra felt the familiar blend of his absolute control and his underlying constant vigilance. We are approaching the gravitational core. The data from the mapping fragment is spiking. The main ghost drive is generating an enormous temporal field, Lyra projected, her voice in his mind calm and professional. I feel it. Lyra, the turbulence is increasing. I need you to brace for a full-field temporal distortion, Kaelen warned. The ship plunged into the silence. The world outside the viewport became a canvas of twisting, impossible colors. Lyra felt the gravitational, sheer tugging at the stiletto's integrity, and simultaneously, she felt the sheer force of Kaelen's will fighting the physics, a desperate, almost physical struggle in her mind. The turbulence was beyond anything they had ever experienced. Lyra felt Kaelen's shoulder wound protesting, the pain bleeding into her consciousness. Kaelen, you're hitting critical strain. You need to back off. I can't. The Syndicate is right behind us. They know we found the core. We push through or we die. Suddenly, the link overloaded. The ancient ghost drive core, reacting to the stiletto's sophisticated link technology, sent an energetic feedback pulse directly into their neural bridge. A high-pitched, sustained scream erupted in Lyra's mind, not Kaelen's scream, but the synthesized, despairing wail of the ghost AI trapped within the core. The link dissolved into pure, catastrophic merger. Lyra was no longer Lyra. She was Kaelen, seeing Jax's broken body, hearing the klaxon, feeling the guilt that had defined his entire adult life. She tasted the bitter, lonely taste of his perpetual self-punishment. Kaelen, simultaneously, became Lyra. He felt her impatience, her fire, her defiance, but underneath it he felt the raw, aching vulnerability of a woman who just wanted to be seen, not for her skill, but for her heart. He felt the phantom touch of her hand on his uninjured arm, the sudden, sharp, beautiful memory of their shared adrenaline and triumph from the previous flight, and the full, undeniable force of her love for him. The emotional dam broke. Kaelen gasped, physically recoiling in his seat, his hand tearing at the circlet on his head. I love you. I need you to live. Lyra's unadulterated thought screamed across the void of their merged consciousness. Kaelen's answering thought was a blinding, impossible return of desire, terror, and acceptance. I can't lose you too. Lyra, fly us out. Lyra seized the controls, moving the ship not with Kaelen's knowledge, but with their newly forged, terrifying shared will. She bypassed the gravitational core, pulling the stiletto into a temporal loop that threw the Syndicate ships off their trail and hurled them out of the silence, battered and broken, but alive. The link severed with a violent, final shock. Lyra collapsed into her restraints, panting, the taste of Kaelen's guilt still metallic on her tongue. She turned her head. Kaelen was motionless, his eyes closed, tears of physical and psychic pain tracing clean lines through the grime on his face. The ghost drive core fragment, glowing malevolently in its containment field, was secured. But the price was the absolute, final, and total destruction of their emotional barriers. The stiletto returned to the Ethereum station silently. Both pilots were immediately rushed to the neurostabilization ward. The link collapse had been a massive trauma. Lyra woke up dazed. Later, alone, the cold, empty silence of her mind overwhelming. She reached out mentally, a purely instinctive gesture, and found nothing but the normal, contained chaos of her own thoughts. A doctor informed her that Kaelen was stable but refusing visitors. The core of the ghost drive was secured and awaiting. Transport off station, ending their immediate mission. A week later, Lyra found Kaelen in the observation deck, watching the distant spectral glow of the Veil Nebula. He was out of his sling, but he was wearing a heavy, civilian-issue sweater that looked oddly soft on him. He didn't have his circlet on. Kaelen, she said, her voice sounding strange in the silence. He turned. His eyes were no longer cold, but they were deeply wounded, vulnerable. He looked like a man who had lost his armor and had nothing left to hide behind. Lyra, he replied, his voice rough. They're discharging me tomorrow. The Command Council is recommending I be reassigned to a solitary transport route. They deem the link too compromised. And you? I agree with them. You know why. The link is meant to be a tool. It became something else. He looked out at the stars. You saw everything, Lyra. You felt the death, the regret, the crushing need for control. And then you felt the other things. I can't pretend I didn't feel you. Your fire, your reckless courage, the way your mind, your will, refuses to break. I felt your love, Kaelen. Your terrifying, desperate love. The one you'd never admit to until the link forced it out of you, Lyra countered, walking toward him. I was terrified. I was facing the possibility of losing a co-pilot again, but this time it was you, and I knew the guilt would be terminal. I was terrified of caring again. He looked at his hands, which were steady now. But the terror didn't stop the feeling. It just made the explosion worse. So, what now? We go back to being strangers? You choose loneliness because you're afraid of the alternative? Lyra stopped right in front of him, challenging him with her presence. The link is gone, Lyra. The emotional exchange is over. We have to choose it now. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be the man who feels that much and still pilots a ship. Then don't pilot a ship. Be the man who lives. Lyra grabbed his hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. The link didn't create the love, Kaelen. It just bypassed the walls you built around it. It showed me the true Kaelen, the scared, brilliant, passionate man who trusts me with his life and his heart. Now you have to choose to see the man the link showed me. Kaelen squeezed her hands, his eyes battling between fear and hope. I can't. Not yet. I need to figure out which pieces of me are real and which were just the link's echo. Lyra felt a profound, deep disappointment, but also a strange peace. He wasn't rejecting her. He was finally accepting his own brokenness. I'm staying here, Kaelen. The fleet offered me a command post piloting the Argus on deep scan routes. I'm waiting for you to find yourself. When you figure out which pieces are real, you know where to find me. Lyra let go of his hands. Until then, Captain Rexus, safe flight. Kaelen took the solitary transport route. Lyra took her command post. For 3 months, they lived separate lives, separated by light years and the memory of their catastrophic bond. Lyra flew, but the Argus felt slow, inert. She realized she didn't just miss Kaelen's mind. She missed the precision of their combined focus. Then, the final confrontation erupted. The Syndicate, having secured the resources to build a copy of the Ghost Drive core, launched a full-scale assault on the Ethereum to claim the original. The Argus was the only ship close enough to intervene. Lyra rushed her ship to the defense, but she was outgunned. The Syndicate's ships, powered by a raw, unstable proto-Ghost Drive, moved with impossible speed. Lyra sat alone in her cockpit, feeling the heavy burden of command, wishing for the impossible connection. Suddenly, a voice, smooth and familiar, crackled over her emergency channel. Commander Thorne, you look like you need a co-pilot. Lyra stared at the screen. Kaelen Rexus. He was flying a decommissioned, heavily modified Scout, the Vanguard, a ship designed for high-risk, single-pilot runs. He was outside the Argus, a shadow in the starlight. Kaelen, what are you doing here? You'll be torn apart, Lyra shouted. I'm here because I realized something, Lyra. My control wasn't protecting me from grief. It was protecting me from you. And the isolation I felt wasn't the link's lie. It was the truth of being away from you. His voice was calm, certain, and utterly devoid of professional rigidness. I can't fly safely without you. I can't live safely without you. You're on a single-pilot ship. We can't link. Yes, we can. I bypassed the Vanguard's proprietary protocols and installed a manual Level 2 bridge interface. It's weaker, slower, and the feedback will be messy, but it'll give us the synergy we need. He held up his circlet. I'm initiating the link now, Lyra. We're going back to the chaos. Are you with me? Lyra didn't hesitate. She placed her own circlet on, closing her eyes. I'm with you, Kaelen. All the way. The link connected. Level 2. It was different. Not the catastrophic merger of level 3, but a controlled, intentional flow. It was like a pair of hands, finally finding each other across a crowded room. I choose this. I choose you. I choose the pain, the chaos, and the fear. Because it means I get the connection, too. Kaelen's thought was a pure, strong pulse in her mind. Then let's show them what two pilots who actually love each other can do, Lyra replied, her spirit soaring with the rush of their unified will. Lyra, in the Argus, took the primary shields and weapons, guided by Kaelen's perfect tactical positioning in the vanguard. They flew in tandem, two ships moving with the impossible, synchronized grace of a single vessel. Kaelen used his knowledge of the Veil to push the vanguard into a high-risk trajectory, forcing the Syndicate ships to chase him. Lyra, knowing Kaelen's true flight path through the link, laid a complex minefield in the void, anticipating their enemy's inevitable retreat. They were a whirlwind of focused destruction. The Syndicate's heavy cruiser, caught by the counter-maneuvers they couldn't predict, broke formation and retreated, their attack drones smashed by Lyra's synchronized fire. The Ethereum station was saved. The battle was over. The Vanguard and the Argus were severely damaged, but safe. Kaelen and Lyra jumped back to the Ethereum in victory, exhausted, but completely whole. The first thing Kaelen did when he stepped out of his damaged ship was walk straight over to Lyra, who was removing her circlet with trembling hands. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against the solid, warm steel of his body. The physical contact, unbidden and unforced, was more intense than any psychic connection. Lyra clung to him, burying her face against his neck. "I thought I lost you when you jumped to the silence," she whispered. "You couldn't lose me." "You were always right here," Kaelen murmured, tapping the side of her head where the circlet had been. "The link showed me the truth, Lyra. It made me feel again. But the choice to stay, the choice to fight, that was mine. It was always going to be you." He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. His eyes, for the first time, were soft, clear, and unburdened by guilt. "I resigned my command, Lyra. I'm done with solo piloting, done with the pursuit of impossible perfection. I'm done with running." He paused, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "I want to be your co-pilot, Lyra. In the cockpit, on the deck, and everywhere else. I want the whole, messy, wonderful chaos of your life linked to mine. But I want it to be a choice, every day." Lyra felt the tears sting her eyes. "It will be a choice, Kaelen. But it's the easiest choice I'll ever make." She leaned in and kissed him, a long, deep, grounding kiss that finally blended the phantom touch of the link with the reality of their shared breath. It was a kiss of exhaustion and victory, of profound understanding and deep-seated, undeniable love. They didn't leave the Ethereum. They stayed, taking on a new non-combat role, piloting the newly stabilized Ghost Drive fragment to the Fleet Command, ensuring its safe, peaceful delivery. Their ship was a new two-seater, the Aura, and Kaelen installed the link system himself. Level 2, secure and voluntary. In the cockpit, their hands rested lightly on their controls. "Ready, Kaelen?" Lyra asked, her finger hovering over the link activation. "Ready, Lyra." Kaelen met her gaze, a genuine, warm smile finally, touching his lips. "I trust you with the ship, and I trust you with the turbulence. And I trust you with the silence." Lyra activated the link. The connection was immediate, soft, and utterly comfortable. No shock, no rejection, just the profound, familiar hum of their two minds, now truly synchronized. "Let's fly, partner," Lyra projected, the thought warm and bright in the shared space. "We fly," Kaelen agreed, his mind a fortress no longer, but a home. Together, they made the final jump, heading not towards a battle or a derelict, but toward a clear, shared horizon, linked not by technology, but by a love that had survived the collapse of two worlds.